All right, so hi. My first question as always, are we live? Hopefully we're live. I can already see that we have many connections both on YouTube and on Facebook for today's awesome session about the Zohar's infinite power. And when I say infinite, I don't mean it as a figure of speech. I mean literally there is infinite power in this book that comes from a world, a spiritual world called the world of infinity. We'll get back to that soon. So just please say hi and let me know if you can see okay, if you can hear all right, if we're good to go. So as usual, Facebook, YouTube, just before we get started on today's session on the Zohar's infinite power, and we'll get going in a moment. And also as usual, if you can say hi in the chat to your fellow viewers. We have viewers, as always, from all around the world that are connecting here. I just want to get an okay, so David says all good on Facebook. Let's just get a confirmation that we're good on YouTube as well, and then we'll be good to go. I don't see a confirmation yet. Anyway, in the meantime, please say hi, also to me, but also to our fellow viewers who are watching. Say hi and say where you're from. It's just beautiful to see how different nationalities, ages, I'm sure, genders, different people from all walks of life who just want to come and learn about the Zohar and the infinite power that lies in it. So I can already see Melissa from New Jersey, and Cristiano from Italy, and Diego from Las Vegas, and Kathy, who says it's good on YouTube. Great, Kathy. And Carolina from Poland, and Samson from Ethiopia. Hi again, Samson. And David from Quebec, of course. San, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. San from the Netherlands. And Carmen from Philadelphia. Keep going, keep writing where you're from, just so we can really get inspired by all these connections from all around the world of people who want to come and learn about the Zohar. So I'll be looking here and here at you guys. So I'm not looking away from you, even though it looks like it on the camera, but I'm not. I'm looking at you, and I'm seeing your questions, and I'm seeing the chat. And also we have the lovely Ruth who's taking your questions, and the lovely Rachel, who is supporting and answering you in the chat and posting links that you need. So we're here together, and I think we're ready to get started. I think we're good to go. So let's do it. So, welcome to Kabbalah Explained Simply. I'm Gil Shear, and in this session we are going to talk about the infinite power of the Zohar, of the Book of Zohar. So the Book of Zohar, most of you have probably heard of it. It's a book that's been clouded in mystery and mysticism and confusion for almost 2,000 years since it was written. And there are many disagreements about the history of the Book of Zohar, who wrote it, and there are many popular verses of the Book of Zohar, like Zohar Bereshit and Ana Bekoach, and there are many talks about Zohar that you're not allowed to study unless you've done this and done that, etc., 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 and that the Zohar is locked. And in fact, that last one is true, the Zohar is locked, but the key is not a physical key, it's a key that you can find and you can acquire, even in this session. So any questions you have, please post them in the chat. And if you want to help other people also join this session, then you could easily do that by simply liking and or sharing this session right now, just clicking the button. That will bring more people to watch the session live, and it'll be awesome. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about the infinite power that's in the Zohar. Now, to understand what the infinite power in the Zohar is, then we first will cover how the Book of Zohar was written and how it was revealed to humanity. In the beginning, it was hidden. We'll understand what the Zohar's key role is in bringing humanity towards a new level of development, a better level, of course, And of course, we'll talk about why the Zohar has this infinite power in it and how we can tap into it. So let's start our journey, and any questions you have, any comments you have, write them in the chat. That will be great. And let's get going. All right. So the Zohar's infinite power. Oops, wrong button. Where is the right one? Here it is. Okay, so let's start off with the first topic that I mentioned about the writing of the Book of Zohar and its revelation to humanity. So it's a fascinating story. It started 1800 years ago in a cave in the Galilee. That's somewhat north of Israel. In that cave were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and his son, Rabbi Elazar, and they were in hiding from the Roman emperor. And they were in that cave for 13 years, eating carob off the tree, that's what the legend says, and drinking from a stream that was nearby the cave. And actually what they were really doing is they were preparing themselves for writing a book that will completely change the face of history. And as the years passed, 8 more Kabbalists joined Rashbi and his son together in the cave, where they studied and they wrote the Book of Zohar. So that's how it started. Now, it wasn't by chance that they were 10 Kabbalists, because 10 in Kabbalah resembles 10 Sefirot. And each one of these Kabbalists that wrote together the Book of Zohar, they each represented a Sephirah themselves. But if you've already seen previous sessions on the Tree of Life and the 10 Sephirot, then you know that every Sephirah on its own is limited in what it can, in the light that it can receive. And really what we're always aiming to reach is the complete structure of the 10 Sephirot. And that's exactly what the authors of the Book of Zohar were. They were this complete structure of the 10 Sephirot, and like the 10 Sephirot, they were completely interconnected in their intention, in their spirit, and from that connection, they wrote the Book of Zohar. So just try and picture this for a second, like these 10 people in a cave that are connected above bodies, above time, above space, connected to this dimension, to this spiritual dimension, where they find this oneness, this divinity. And from that state of divinity, they write this book. Now, they didn't reveal this book to everyone. This book was actually hidden. It was concealed because people weren't ready for it yet. And as the legend tells, at least, it was found, it disappeared. It was in the cave, and then some merchants found it, and paper was a pretty rare commodity at that time, and they found paper, so they were really happy, and they used it to wrap their fish in the market. And then, as the story says, a little boy from the city of Tzfat, bought fish for his father, a Kabbalist, and he brought the fish back home, and the Kabbalist opened the fish, and he saw the paper that it was written in, and he was in awe and shock and disbelief and joy. And then he quickly went to the market and he bought every fish he could find and aimed to reconstruct the writings of the Book of Zohar. Of course, only a very small portion of the writings were actually found, but those writings are actually enough for humanity today to tap into its infinite power. Because even from a little bit, if inside of that little bit is infinity, then that really is infinity itself. And then, how was the Book of Zohar revealed in our times? So to answer that, let's watch a short clip from one of my favorite series, a course called Enter the Zohar, and this is part of clip number 4 of that course, which talks exactly about this, how it was revealed in our time. So let's tune in and let's take a look.
The history of the Zohar is really a story about the ripening and eventual readiness of the human spirit to grow. There's a unique quality about the presence of Kabbalistic writings. They play this hide and seek with our ability to measure them from the outside. That's because Kabbalists make efforts to conceal them so they can be found by people with a true need to seek them out. Their authors know that the process of change demands two conditions: the right moment and maturity of the soul. In the 2nd century, just after the destruction of the Second Temple, Shimon Bar Yochai was a principal student of the monumental Kabbalist Rabbi Akiva, and among the leaders of the Bar Kokhba revolt against Roman rule. Tried in absentia, he was sentenced to death by the emperor, and for years they tried to capture him, but he seemed to have vanished. For 13 years he hid with his son in a cave in the Galilee, where they continued the study of the wisdom, and were granted the highest attainment of spiritual knowledge the Kabbalists from Abraham to Moses had acquired over the 3,000 years before his time, uncovering the entire system of nature. At the death of the emperor, Bar Yochai chose 9 students and called them Idra Rabbah, the Great Assembly. They were 10 men whose inner qualities precisely matched the qualities of the natural system. In a cave on Mount Meron, he and his students created the Book of Zohar, telling them, "I am arranging you as follows. I will speak. My son Elazar will engage orally. Rabbi Abba will write. And the rest of the friends will converse in their hearts." He told them that the Zohar could only be revealed at the end of the exile, and its appearance to the masses would signal the completion of a 6,000-year period given for the correction of humanity. As soon as the Zohar was completed, it was hidden, because they knew at that time that the people of the world didn't need it, and therefore would not understand what it said. Its pages were buried in a cave near the town of Sfat, and stayed hidden for 900 years, till they were discovered by a boy who sold them as wrapping paper to a fish merchant. A Kabbalist from the town saw and immediately bought up what remained of the pages, collecting them into a book which was secretly studied in small groups, making its way to Spain 200 years later. Still, its meanings remained closed until in 16th century Sfat, a young Kabbalist, Isaac Luria, the Ari, was able to grasp it at its deepest level. Using an arrangement of students similar to Rabbi Shimon's, he created works, the Tree of Life and the Gatehouse of Intentions, laying open the message and the method that had been locked in the book. From that point, anyone could study, provided they already possessed the correct intention and need. It's the nature of hidden things that they can only be discovered at a suitable moment when suitable souls are born into the world. It wasn't until the 20th century, and history's fiercest explosion of human desire, in the generation for which the Zohar was intended, that a unique soul appeared. That of Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag, called Baal HaSulam, the master of the ladder, the only Kabbalist in the 20th century to write commentaries on the Zohar and the works of the Ari. His work gave us the necessary final link connecting the lofty reach of the wisdom to our human experience. He is the only Kabbalist to ever offer a clear, working method that can be used by anyone in the world. The question of why the Zohar was written is far more important than the question of who wrote it. The Zohar can't be understood and felt directly. It requires preparation and an accurate preconception of spirituality. Baal HaSulam's introductions to the Book of Zohar, they guide a person's approach. They cultivate our inner properties so they can clearly see it and we can enter it. And just as Shimon Bar Yochai said 2,000 years ago, millions of people around the world are now finding the Zohar, and through Baal HaSulam's works are able to open an entirely new level of existence. And now you are part of the story.
Yes, you are part of the story. Every single one of you who is watching now is part of this story, and we will be reading from the Zohar together as well, just to feel that power, to tap into it a little bit. And you could also catch last week's session, which we covered, where we covered 5 tips for how to read the Zohar. So that's highly recommended. You probably won't see it right now, but if you're watching the recording, then you'll see it, here. So that's for the recording later on. All right, so let's keep going. So the whole beginning of the Zohar was this kind of mystery, written in a cave. It was concealed, and then it was written by a 10, which resembles 10 Sefirot, and then it disappeared, and then it was found and wrapped in fish paper, and then it was revealed again, and then in the time of the Ari until Baal Sulam, it's like this crazy story. Actually, some of you might identify with that story because great things have a tendency to have interesting stories to how they're revealed. And I think many of you who found the wisdom of Kabbalah, I'm sure there are some of you here that are seeing this for the first time, but there are others that have already started studying Kabbalah in Kabyu and have been around for a while. And I know that when you also found Kabbalah and when you found this wisdom, then you too probably have an amazing story of how it happened by chance, just like how the Zohar was revealed. So whenever amazing things are revealed, there's always some kind of cool story behind it. So that was the story of the Zohar. Now let's keep going and let's talk about the Zohar's infinite power. And like I said in the beginning of the session, when I say infinite, I literally mean there is infinite power in it. It's not a figure of speech. So let's talk a little bit about the Zohar's infinite power. But first, I want to read you a quick quote from Kabbalist Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Echstein. So he says this: "One who has never seen the light of the Book of Zohar has never seen light in his life." Again, one who has never seen the light of the Book of Zohar has never seen light in his life. So Kabbalists that have touched upon this book have found in it this vast potential. And the reason why the Zohar has infinite power, it starts from the fact that the Kabbalists that wrote the Book of Zohar, they wrote it from a state called Malchut of En Sof. So En Sof, for those of you who know, in Hebrew, it means infinity. It also means En Sof, no end, and that's also an interpretation of how this can be approached. But for now, let's talk about the En Sof as Malchut of En Sof, Malchut of infinity. Now, what's Malchut of infinity? So just really quickly to explain it, because it's just, you need to understand enough to understand what it means. So Malchut of En Sof is, if you take a look at the beginning of creation, where there was only a light and a vessel, and they were in complete connection, in complete harmony, and after that there was a process, and I won't go into this now. You can check out other sessions of Kabbalah Explained Simply where we cover it in more depth, but basically the light and the Kli, they separated, and they went through 125 degrees of separation until it reached the lowest level, which is the beginning of this world. And today we need to climb these levels back up, these 125 degrees, to again reach this adhesion. And the highest level is called the Malchut of En Sof. It's before there was any restriction of the light. It is a state of being completely united as one. And that is the state the authors of the Zohar wrote from. So the authors of the Zohar were very special souls. Each of them reached the individual final state of correction, meaning they wrote the Book of Zohar from this corrected state, from the 125th degree, from the Malchut of En Sof. And they wrote it as a complete structure of 10. There were other writings as well, like the writings of the Ari, Baal Sulam, Moses, of course, Adam, Abraham, etc. But there is no other piece, there is no other, you can even call it like a mechanism, like the Zohar, because it's the only book that was written from that state, from 10 Kabbalists working in unison, the great assembly, the Idra Rabbah, who wrote it from being in that complete state of perfection, from being in the Malchut of En Sof, and from resembling the complete 10 Sefirot. And that's why the Book of Zohar, it literally holds infinite power from the state of Malchut, of infinity. Now, the Kabbalists that wrote this, they connected the lowest degrees of this world to the highest degrees of infinity. So every person that opens the Book of Zohar, with the correct guidance, of course, can tap into that power. That is basically the correction, you could say, that these Kabbalists made, that any person can tap into that force. Because when they were here, sitting in this world, in this cave, right, the 10 of them, and they wrote the Book of Zohar together in this complete structure of the 10 Sefirot, they linked the state of infinity and you could say the writings of the book, they link them together. So anyone who approaches this book with a correct intention, with a correct desire, and again, that you can see in last week's session about the Zohar, what is the correct intention, what is the correct desire. So anyone who does have that can tap into the full force, the full potential of the Zohar. All right, let's keep going. Let me take a look at the questions. So Biruk is asking, is the Zohar for everyone or for Kabbalists already in attainment? So I think I just answered that, Biruk. Basically, the Zohar is for everyone. You don't need to be in that state in order to tap into that force. Just like you don't need to be an engineer in order to use a washing machine or a dishwasher or drive a car. You simply need to know how to press the button. That's all you need to learn. So it's the same here with the Book of Zohar. You do need to learn how to press the correct button, meaning the button that's inside your heart, but that's all you need. You don't need to attain it. You don't need to rise 125 degrees. Actually, the Zohar has the force to lift you to those degrees. All right, let's keep going. So what else do we have? The Zohar is infinite power, a correction from this world to the highest spiritual world. So I think I already mentioned that. I covered that here, that when the Kabbalists wrote this book, then they made that link, they made that connection. And this was never done before by any Kabbalist. Since the first Kabbalist, Adam, who lived 5,780 years ago, there was no situation that there were 10 Kabbalists who represented these 10 primordial Sefirot and who wrote this book from a state that has the potential to correct everything. By the way, that's also, because it was written from the state of perfection, that is also why the Zohar has a very, you could say, calming effect. We'll read the Zohar soon, we'll read a few excerpts. But when you do read the Zohar, even if you don't completely understand the words that are written, and it's all written in allegories, it's all metaphorical, of course, to answer you, Ali. There isn't a single word in the Zohar that speaks of this world. It speaks only of the spiritual worlds. But yes, when you do read the Zohar, you can feel this calmness, a little bit like a baby in a womb, I guess, because that's the state where it comes from that state of perfection, of complete connection between the Kli, that will that was created, and the light, this force of nature that only wants to fulfill that vessel. So the Zohar has infinite power, and as Kabbalists say, if you taste, you'll see. And no one can prove or by explaining. Only if you taste it, then you will see that it is good. Okay, let's see some maybe more questions. Okay, there's a question from Bliss. How is it that these 10 people attained that state? That's a good question. And why those 10? Actually, it has to do not so much with the 10 people, but with a state of the generation, of the desire, of the evolving desire. So we will cover that in the next section of this session, where we'll talk exactly about that. But let's read a quote from the Zohar. So just a few tips. You don't need to understand what you're reading. You don't need to, there's no intellect here. It's pure emotion. It's writing from the complete and perfect state, and that's all there is to it. So let's just read a quote just to kind of feel the power of the Zohar, and then we will continue. So this is from Acharei Mot, Zohar Acharei Mot, after the death, from item 66. So the Zohar says this: and you, the friends who are here, as you were in fondness and love before, you will not part henceforth, until the Creator rejoices with you and summons peace upon you. And by your merit there will be peace in the world. This is the meaning of the words, for the sake of my brothers and my friends, let me say, let peace be in you. Let's read it again. And you, the friends who are here, as you were in fondness and love before, you will not part henceforth, until the Creator rejoices with you and summons peace upon you. And by your merit there will be peace in the world. This is the meaning of the words, for the sake of my brothers and my friends, let me say, let peace be in you. So that's a beautiful excerpt from the Zohar. I want to conclude this session by reading a quote from Ramak, a great Kabbalist, who also writes about the infinite light of the Zohar, and he says the following: when engaging in this composition, one evokes the power of the souls with the power of Moses. This is so because while engaging in it, they renew the generated light which was created during its composition. And divinity shines and illuminates from that light as when it was first created. And all who engage in it reawaken that same benefit and that first light which Rashbi and his friends had revealed while composing. So it's actually quite incredible to think of it, that the Kabbalists who wrote this from this incredible state that it's even hard to imagine, they were like as one when they wrote it, and they tapped into this vast force. And because of that, when we read the Zohar, when you read the Zohar right now, then you can reawaken that same light. The same light that Rashbi and his friends revealed when composing it, we can reawaken by reading the Zohar now. So this brings us to the next part of the session, of why is the Zohar being revealed today? How is the Zohar, how can the Book of Zohar, how can this infinite power of the Zohar lead humanity from its current state of crisis to a state of connection, to a state of perfection? Can it even? I mean, if you're talking about infinite force, then you would expect that, right? You would say, all right, if this has infinite force, then why isn't it spreading everywhere? And why isn't the world so beautiful? And why isn't my life so great? And why aren't I a millionaire? And why isn't everything going well for me? And all these things that, you know, the ego kind of brings up in a person, these thoughts. There is a reason for all of this, and let's see what it is. Just a quick question. Let's just take a few more quick questions about this topic of the infinite power of the Zohar before we move on to this last segment of the Zohar today. So we have Daniel is asking if there's a French translation, will it have the same power? That probably goes for any language, I guess you're asking. Does the translated text hold the same power in it? The answer is possibly, because it depends. If you Google translate the Zohar, will it have the same power as the original text? Probably not, although I wouldn't say it has no power, but it probably won't have the same kind of structure and wholeness. And what would make a translation good? I guess it would depend on the person translating it. That's why we have our own translators in Bnei Baruch, in Kabbalihinfo, who are veteran students of our teacher, Kabbalist Dr. Michael Latman, and it's not a task. We don't, outsource translation to translation companies, although it's, it could be a lot more convenient. But no, we want to make sure that the power is maintained, and it's done in collaboration with the Kabbalists as well. So if it's done correctly, yes, then there's almost, you could say, no difference in the translation and in the original text. Okay, what else? Okay. Let's keep going. There are still good questions here, but some of them are related to the next part. So keep writing your questions, and Ruth, keep posting them, and we'll get back for another quick Q&A session in a few minutes. So this is, in my opinion, a very fascinating part about the Zohar, that this 1800-year-old book actually has the power in it to lift all of humanity, to bring harmony, to bring fulfillment to every single one of us, to every person on the planet on the face of this planet. And why is that? So let's try and understand why is that. So human desire at its peak of development. That is the first point. Now, to understand this, then let's look for a second at how the human desire evolved. All right. Here it is. Okay. So human desire at its peak of development. If we're looking at if we're looking at this, right? So this is the beginning of creation, meaning of the creation of this world. Well, it's not really, you could say, creation. It's already a consequence, and this whole world is a world of consequence. But let's say 14 billion years ago, there was a spark of light together with this matter that was created by this light, like a plus and a minus, and these two forces intertwined. Actually, like all development in this world, it's always from two opposite forces. They led to constant development, right? So the human desire has been evolving for, well, you could say the desire has been evolving for billions of years, even before humanity. It's the same raw desire, but because the light is constantly developing it, then it changes forms. That's actually the driving force of evolution. No one knows how life started on the planet, only that it started about 3.8 billion years ago. And they know the conditions where it started, but no one knows how it started. So Kabbalah says that the start of life and the evolution of it too is all driven by this force of light. So it's an internal driving force of the mechanism we're in. So remember the beginning, we were all there before there was time and space, before 14 billion years ago. Yep, you were there too. At least a part of you was, that point inside of you that belongs to that state, and each of us have that point. So yes, you were there, although you don't remember it. And in that point, in that state, everything and everyone was connected in complete and perfect harmony. And like I said, everything disappeared and this harmony disconnected, and I won't explain now why, but of course it's purposeful. And then what remained was simply this desire, this will to receive, that started evolving in this world. And it evolved through states of still, vegetative, animate, and like I said, about 4 billion years ago, then this is when life emerged in the simplest form, like stupid single-celled organisms. Well, they're not stupid actually, they're pretty smart, but they're very simple, you could say. And then this led to evolution, the single cells and multicellular organisms, nucleated cells and all of that. Let's jump ahead to human beings, because that's what I want to talk about now. So then, around 200,000 years ago, of course, this axis isn't really on scale, but you'll forgive me. So humanity started, in a way, and humanity had desires that were evolving. So in the beginning there was just animalistic desires, just like the animals, for food, for sex, for family, and then these desires evolved, so around 6,000 years ago they evolved, so from food, sex, family, shelter, they evolved to more advanced human desires like power, like money, other things like knowledge and status, and all of the human desires. Now, what happened, and what's happening actually, make some more room. Sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. So what's happening actually now is that something that's never happened ever before is happening to the human desire. Can you guess what it is? What's happening to the human desire in our times today? I'll give you a few seconds, write in the chat. I'll just give you a few seconds. I know there's some delay, so I'll give it a few seconds. You write it and I'll continue. So the question is, what is special about our times? And what happened to this desire, the human desire that's been evolving and evolving and evolving? So the answer is, drum roll, it reached satiation. Meaning it reached a certain level, and I'm sure many of you can identify with this. Hope I spelled that correctly. So it reached satiation. And what is that satiation? What does it mean for the desire? It means that instinctively human beings feel, many of them do at least, not everyone has reached this satiation, but this is the general state of development, that it's reached its final level in its current development. Meaning what once we thought would fulfill us, like these fulfillments, like money, like power, like honor, like knowledge, like food, like sex, all of these things that we thought at least will fulfill us, they've lost their magic to them. And this is, by the way, this is what leads to very, very high depression and suicide rates, specifically in areas and cities where there is really high life standards, like Melbourne, like Toronto, places where you would think, all right, they have it great there, they can make good money, they have the nice weekend, they can have a boat and a beach house, and life is relatively easy in those places. But alongside with that, there is also a really high rate of depression and suicide in those very places. And the reason is because you think something will fulfill you, and then you go and chase it, and you get it eventually. In some places you don't, and then you still think it will fulfill you, but in other places you do, and then you're not happy or not satisfied. And that is because the human desire has reached a state of satiation. It's no longer developing on this layer. And what is this leading us to? What is this leading humanity to? This whole kind of, it's actually an incredible process. Depression is the greatest epidemic of our time. Much, much, much worse than coronavirus and other forms, cardiac arrests and things like that. No, depression is the #1 epidemic. People are simply depressed. They don't feel happiness. They don't feel fulfillment. That's it. That's what they're missing something in their lives. They feel. If you've spoken to someone who's in depression, it's very sad. It's a state of like, what's all this for? What's the point? You're all motivated. I'm going to get a raise, and I'm going to get a promotion. And someone who's depressed is like, but what for? And that question, it comes from a correct place. It doesn't mean you need to reach depression to find Kabbalah. No, many people find Kabbalah from like this search for something. I found it that way as well. I found it from this search for something deeper and meaningful, not from depression. But many people also find it from that state. And there's something really interesting in this process. If you look at the process of evolution, like 4 billion years of life, then it can help us identify what this next state is and what's happening to humanity, because there is a next state here. This is not the end. It's just actually it's the beginning. So let's for a second look at 4 billion years of evolution, just to try and understand what's going on here. So we had at the beginning single-celled organisms like prokaryotes and other kinds of simple cells and organisms, and they developed into nucleated cells and multicellular organisms like us, like human beings. And if every time you look at how these new things formed, you always see that the result is this kind of collective consciousness, right? Because what is even our body? It's just a collection of cells. So, but it's clear that there is also in these cells, there is some kind of collective, because they're acting in a way that the sum, the whole, is greater than the sum of its parts. If you take cells and put them in some kind of tube, they won't suddenly emerge into life. But in our bodies and in everything in reality, actually, even in this pen and in plants, it's always this this state of collective consciousness. So that's already the result. I didn't say how that transition happened. I will in a few minutes, but let's just start looking at 4 billion years, and we'll see that every time the result of the new level of development, the new level of emergence, it's called, is always a result in a state of collective consciousness, of all the different parts of the system feeling as one. Not just collaborating, not sharing resources, but actually feeling as being part of one whole. Not just feeling, actually being part of one whole, belonging to something that's greater. So that's clear that there is a state of collective consciousness. Now, if we look around us, what do we see? Do we see this beautiful state of collective consciousness and harmony and like a new level of emergence around us? No, unfortunately, we see quite the opposite. We see disconnect and crises and wars and ego eruption and famine, and it looks like things are actually falling apart. So how can this be the brink of a new level? How can this be the start of, the Zohar that was written for our times? That's what it says, for our generation the Zohar was written actually. How can that be? So what's going on here? So to answer that, I'd like to show you another clip. So let's take a look at the clip, and then after that we'll continue with some more questions. Where is that clip? Here it is. It's actually it's a premiere of a clip from a brand new course. It's called Kabbalah and the Science of Human Emergence. It's a course that we worked quite a while on, myself as the instructor and a team, and you can find that course on Kabbalahinfo. So let's just watch it. Let's take a look. If humanity is evolving towards greater connection and the emergence of a collective consciousness, then why is our time filled with conflicts and crises in every area of human engagement? What role do these crises play in our evolution? The 21st century is a paradoxical time in human development. We're probably the most advanced and yet conflicted civilization that ever existed on this planet. Our world is a hyper-connected global village, yet social and political divide are intensifying at the same time. Technology has enabled us to transcend the boundaries of time and space, and yet, in many ways, we feel more lonely and isolated than ever before. Technically, we can easily feed, clothe, house, and provide for all the people in the world, yet billions still suffer from severe deprivation of basic human needs. And while most people in the world have far beyond what they need, depression is still becoming the #1 cause of disability. And how about our ecosystem? We've managed to basically harness the natural resources of the planet in virtually every way we want. And as we're doing so, we're continuously polluting and destroying the only home we've got. So how can we see what's happening to the human family from an evolutionary point of view? Here is a fascinating example that may help us understand what's going on. Let's zoom in to a growing caterpillar. Under the skin of the caterpillar, you'll find billions of cells living together. Now, similar to us humans, all the cells are doing different things. Some work in the digestive system, breaking down the food and making all sorts of products. Others work in the immune system, which is sort of like the medical industry. Motility cells are constantly working on transportation systems, and so forth. But at some point, the caterpillar as a whole goes through an evolutionary change. It reaches a stage of maximum growth. When that happens, even though the caterpillar has everything it needs to survive and thrive, it can't take in any more food, so everything is radically changing inside. Some cells start losing their jobs, becoming completely irrelevant to the system, and others are wandering around, immigrating to different areas, and the general climate inside the caterpillar becomes chaotic. But all of this is happening because the caterpillar is evolving to its next level, the butterfly. And so the cells have to reinvent their whole way of life. They have to reorganize themselves to create a new kind of organism. In other words, they have to find a new way to connect to each other and form a more advanced level of shared consciousness, that of the butterfly. And here is where it gets really interesting for us. The demise of the caterpillar and the rise of the butterfly are parallel processes. They're intertwined. And so the crises and conflicts we see around us are actually the labor pains of a new level of evolution. And get this, some cells are already seeing it. It turns out that there are imaginal cells within the caterpillar who recognize what's happening. They respond differently to the signals and interpret the chaos as a new beginning. First, they operate as single-celled organisms. It's as though they can only imagine the next level, but they still can't get there. But the next step is where these imaginal cells begin to connect with each other and form the new structure of the butterfly. That's exactly what is happening now to the human species. We're evolving from a caterpillar stage of human civilization into that of a butterfly. A deeper level of human connection has to emerge on a global scale. However, those that are more sensitive to it can already begin to develop it and contribute to humanity's evolution. In fact, this is what Kabbalists have been doing for a few thousands of years now, by developing a method for enhancing human connection. So, are you an imaginal cell? And if you are, how can you take part in the evolution of the butterfly? Discover that and more in our next video. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. The next video, of course, is the next video in the course. So it's actually pretty amazing, and that's also the answer. So we said, so why do we see crisis all around us? It's because this is the birth of a new level of evolution, you could say. Someone mentioned here that it's Elizabeth Sahtouris as imaginal cells. That is correct. Elizabeth Sahtouris, an evolutionary biologist, she explains that all levels of evolution always go through this cycle of connection, when like the single-celled organisms, and then they start separating, and then they reach conflict, and from conflict they need to start reaching negotiation, which leads them to a higher level of unity. Excuse me. And that's how every time, not even humanity, the whole living organism, the whole planet evolves. It's always from a higher state of unity, a higher state of connection. There's only one key difference. The human desire has completed its evolution on the level of this world. That's it. It reached its final stage of 14 billion years. That's the time we're in now. It's a process of 14 billion years, and it ended now. And what's next is to reach a higher level of consciousness, one that is above this world, that is above the desires as we know them currently. And that's exactly where the Book of Zohar can help. It is the force that can help humanity elevate to that new level of evolution, to that state of collective consciousness. And you could say that this The uniqueness of our times is that human beings have to now consciously evolve to that next level. It's like the imaginal cells in the caterpillar, right? Everything's chaotic, everything starts breaking down and collapsing, but they know that it's the birth of a new form, of a butterfly. And that's exactly where we're heading. We're heading towards a new birth of humanity on a higher level, on a level of connection, on a level of love, not egoistic love, like I love fish so I eat them, but true love, which we can't even really define. So it is really exciting times, and the Book of Zohar is finally reaching its time where it can be purposeful and really help each and every one. Let's read one more quote from the Zohar, and then we'll take a look at some questions. So we'll just read the quote for fun. The content of it isn't connected to anything we spoke about. Actually, it is. It's talking about love. Nice. But really, we're not reading it for that. We're reading it just to connect to this force of light, to this energetic, infinite force of light that Kabbalists wrote from that complete state of Malchut of Ein Sof, Malchut of infinity. Let's read it. Let's just try to connect to that state. And the fact that there are over 200 of us right now together from all around the world wanting to connect to that state, that is super powerful. That is, it's actually an amplifier to what you can get from the Zohar. If you study with other people who have a similar intention, then you simply amplify your own intention. So let's do it now. Let's just read this passage, but let's do it as a collective action. All of us together. And even if you're watching the recording, it doesn't matter because the spiritual realm is above time and space. So you can connect. We're carving this point now in the time axis. We're cutting it out of time and we're connecting to a spiritual state now. So even if you watch this in a week or a month or a year, you can still connect to this point right now with us. So let's read. Let's take a look at this excerpt. It's from Va'et Hanan, Zohar Va'et Hanan, I pleaded. Item 146. This palace, the highest of all, is called love, and everything stands on love. As it is written, many waters cannot quench the love. Everything stands with love because the holy name Havaya is so. The upper tip, Keter of Yud, of Havaya, Chochmah, never parts from it, because the Keter is on it with love, and they never part from one another. Likewise is the Hay of Havaya, as it is written, and a river, Binah, comes out of Eden, Chochmah. Binah always comes out of Chochmah, and they forever cling with love. It's like this, every passage is like when you come out of this, like a spa, you know, you have this kind of energy kind of drops. And even now when I'm teaching, so I'm very energetic, but just reading a passage, it brings this calmness from that state. It's beautiful. I love it. So, okay, just a few quick questions. So how can we know, a question from Gilay, how can we know we are the right generation for the Zohar? We know because the Kabbalists who attained this told us. They said that from the year 1995, the human desire will reach its final level of satiation, its final level of egoistic development, and that will be the time for the Zohar to be revealed to everyone, to the masses, to all of humanity. Another question. A question from Fanny. Which state of correction do we need to attain to start to feel the power of the Zohar? It's a good question, Fanny. You don't need to reach a state of correction to start feeling the power of the Zohar. You need to tune yourself in a little bit with a correct approach to the reading. And we did the whole session last week about that, so I highly recommend you watch it. If you don't see the link, then you can just search YouTube for Kabbalah Explained Simply, the Zohar, and you will find it. And there we covered the approach, how to work with the text and what the intention should be, and working with the desire and connecting to the light, and I think there were 5 tips there of how to correctly approach the Book of Zohar in order to unlock its light, actually. Okay, let's take another question. It's actually an unrelated question, but it's a good question in general about Zohar and Kabbalah. So a question from Javier. What does Kabbalah talk about acceptance on self and others? Actually, it is connected to the Zohar, because that same state, the Kabbalists, that group, that great assembly, those 10 Kabbalists who were each representing a sephirah, a part of that complete spiritual structure, they were in a state of complete connection between each other. Complete connection is like, I don't know, like the organs in your body are connected. They're communicating, they're connected with many different forms, some of which science already knows about and others which has not yet identified, but everything in the body is one. So similarly, we need to reach that state according to Kabbalah. And that's why when we read the Zohar together, we amplify its effect on us. Because if we have the intention of connecting between us, and from that connection to tap in to that state, then we can get a lot more from the Zohar. That is actually the purpose of Kabbalah. It's to reconstruct this shattered collective soul, to rebuild it and to be in complete harmony with the force of nature. Okay, so there's a question from Hogas who's asking if I can explain the last verse. So the answer is, I will not explain the last verse, because the Zohar is not an intellectual study. You don't need to interpret the Zohar beyond what the Ari did and Bala Sulam. Well, actually Bala Sulam, who wrote the interpretation of the ladder to the Book of Zohar. And that's all you need. You can go to university and then they can study it academically and intellectually, but it's not spiritual. It's with a wrong intention. With the Zohar, all you need is to come with that desire to connect to what the Kabbalists wrote, to connect to that state of Malchut, of Ein Sof, and even just that, holding that thought, that will enable you to connect to that force. Okay, I think we're out of time. Excuse me. So we're out of time for today. Unfortunately, I would love to continue and keep answering the questions, but it was great to be here with you, and great to connect around and with the Zohar and with this incredible writing. And this is on us. We need to bring this light to the world. If you're hearing this, then it means you have a role in it as well. Whether you want to take it or not, that's up to you. But if you're hearing this, then that's what we need to do. That's our work, to bring this light and to bring this love to the world. So if you enjoyed the session, please like, share, subscribe, because by doing that, it enables this to go out to more people so they can also be a part of this, and hopefully we'll build this collective soul between all of us. So that's all for today. Stay tuned. Right after this, there is the Great Transition live with Joseph and Seth on Kabbalahinfo Facebook and YouTube. Awesome show. It's kind of like a talk show. They cover different current affairs and relevant topics. So tune into that, and we'll see you all next week. I'm Gil Shear. This is Kabbalah Explained Simply, and today we tapped into the infinite power of the Zohar. See you next week.